Getty Advertising in Read invented by TeadsADVERTISINGinRead invented by TeadsProfessor Nigel Biggar, L., has said it is time to acknowledge the positives of British colonial rule. Despite the current vogue for attacking any and all relics of Britain's colonial past, especially among the nation's university students, Nigel Biggar said it was also time to acknowledge the good that British rule brought. The Regius professor of moral and pastoral theology said the British colonialism was all too often seen as a wholly oppressive evil, but it often brought political order and the rule of law to lands where there previously had been none. He said, "Political order might seem like an unexciting value, but without it nothing good can flourish. That's why indigenous peoples sometimes chose to move into territories governed by colonial regimes rather than away from them." Related articles: Spain attacks UK for territorial violation over Gibraltar. Professor's work arguing for colonialism censored after death threats. Getty British officers stationed in Afghanistan in 1878 to 1879. Political order might seem like an unexciting value, but without it nothing good can flourish. Nigel Biggar. Thus millions of Chinese took refuge in British Hong Kong during the early years of communist rule in Beijing, and especially the anarchy of the Cultural Revolution. What gave colonial rule popular legitimacy was not democratic elections but its provision of the goods of security and the rule of law. Mr. Biggar, whose research has covered everything from human rights to the ethics of nationalism, pointed to the way U.S. political scientist Bruce Gilley was treated after suggesting it might be time to question the favored orthodoxy that had given Western colonialism a bad name. Mr. Gilley's argument was that European colonial rule, while harsh, did not introduce atrocities per se. Getty: a statue of Cecil Rhodes displayed on the facade of Oriel College, Oxford. Atrocities had been conducted by the indigenous peoples both before colonialism and after. In Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe oversaw the massacre of 20,000 Ndebele people in the 1980s, decades after independence. Mr. Gilley pointed to the building of coherent political communities, reliable state institutions and housing which allowed communities to flourish. And he quoted Nigerian writer and anti-colonialist Chinua Achebe, who said, "Here is a piece of heresy: the British govern their colony of Nigeria with considerable care. There was a very highly competent cadre of government officials imbued with a high level of knowledge of how to run a country. British colonies were more or less expertly run." He added that while British justice might have been fierce, it could not be bought or sold, and said, "Now all that has changed." Mr. Biggar said if the British continued to hate themselves over colonialism, they risked turning in on themselves and refusing to engage with the world even in the face of obvious evil. He added, "If we believe what strident anti-colonialists tell us, namely that our imperial past was one long unbroken litany of oppression, exploitation and self-deception, then our guilt will make us vulnerable to willful manipulation, and it will confirm the belief that the best way we can serve the world is by leaving it well alone." Writing in the Times, Mr. Biggar said the British could take pride in the Royal Navy's century-long suppression of the Atlantic slave trade, and added, "Bruce Gilley's case for colonialism calls for us British to moderate our post-imperial guilt." "The Roads Must Fall" campaign called for the statue of the colonialist to be taken down. A survey last year showed Britons were broadly proud of the nation's history of colonialism. YouGov found 44% were proud of Britain's history of colonialism, with 21% regretting it happened and 23% holding neither view. However, the history of British rule is also littered with atrocities, not least among them the invention of the concentration camp in the Boer War, an idea later infamously reappropriated by Adolf Hitler. Other horrors include the 1919 Amritsar massacre, which saw as many as 1,000 Indian protesters against British rule shot dead, and the Mau Mau uprising of 1951, which saw between 20,000 and 100,000 Kenyans tortured, abused and killed in British concentration camps. Recent outspoken opponents of Britain's colonial past have included academic Ken Andrews, who argued that UK athletes should protest by taking a knee during the national anthem, and Ntokozo Club, who helped orchestrate the Roads Must Fall campaign at Oxford University. Related articles: Rees-Mogg's strident rejection of ECJ colonization of UK wins cheers, viewers fume over UK bashing on BBC News Night. Partition special: Spanish foreign minister ridicules Gibraltar as modern-day colonialism,